what men would really like is to read a novel with a page about how exactly to construct a bomb, I would say, but no one's going to publish that anymore. They're just not.
My next guest is the author behind a book due out in September, A History of the Novel in Britain, Philip Hensher. He is a novelist, reviewer, and journalist who will be speaking to me on this episode about a novel that has meant a great deal to him over the years, Bleak House by Charles Dickens. But before we get into that, Philip, I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining me. Tell us a little bit about yourself and really what brought you into the studio today.
Well, I always say yes to invitations unless I can think of a very good reason not to. I think it's really important as a writer to be open to meeting whoever wants to talk to you, really. Actually, the thing that writers don't talk enough about is the kind of economic circumstances that make careers possible. And it kind of breaks my heart, really, that nobody now could have the career that I had, that turned me into a writer. What happened? I left university in 1990, spent too long in university, and I started work for the House of Commons. And I was hopeless at it, and I just didn't like it. And I did it for 6 years. And at the end, over the 6 years, I was sort of writing the occasional book review for newspapers, and I published a little novel with Penguin. They didn't pay me very much money for it, but it was all right. And after 6 years, I thought, oh, I just don't want to do this awful job anymore. I'll just get myself sacked. And it was heaven getting sacked. I really recommend it to people.
As I recall, you got sacked for an interview that you
An
gave
interview
to
about a scandalous novel that I'd written. Yeah, and the novel's called Kitchen Venom, and it's just been reissued by an American publisher as a neglected classic. I mean, as Francis Bacon said when he turned down a knighthood, very aging. That does make me feel old to have written a classic. But the crucial thing is that I had a mortgage on a house in central London, and I was just going to pay it by writing book reviews for The Spectator and The Guardian occasionally, and advances on books. I never thought I'd write a bestseller. It wasn't like a major gamble, because my monthly mortgage was 600 quid.
You're right to point to this, the economic context in which you have pursued your career is scarcely available now to most aspirant writers.
It's not available at all. And it's the only people that it's available to are people with some sort of financial backing. I don't have any financial backing. The only thing my parents ever gave me, they bought me a refrigerator when I got married. They complained like bilio about it because they hadn't bought a refrigerator for 40 years. They had no idea how much they cost. It's really heartbreaking that the practice of literature should be passing out of the hands of people without kind of financial backing. There's also a change in the sort of mentality of publishers, I would say, which is when they publish a first novel now, they want it to be a big success and to justify itself. I think my first novel sold 700 copies in hardback, which was widely regarded by Penguin as a disaster. I mean, it would probably be all right now, but you wouldn't be very likely to get a contract for a second and a third one on the back of that.
I don't deny anything you're saying. In fact, I agree wholeheartedly. Don't you also feel a sense of heartbreak for the decline in reading as well? The fact that though it may be harder than ever to build a career as a writer, we're seeing less and less interest in literature, and in particular, I would argue, among men. I was wondering what your thoughts were about the relationship that men have to reading fiction and the great works of literature that have obviously nourished you throughout your life, and what you think the reasons are for the general bias away from fiction to non-fiction among half the world.
Yeah. Well, I think actually the 2 points are connected, which is that I think men. I mean, I don't really want to make huge generalizations about this because I don't really believe in male brains and female brains when it comes down to it. I think that if there is a male brain, it likes new stuff. It likes informational stuff. It will always respond to a paragraph about how a pulley is attracted to a grind wheel or something. And 19th century novels are absolutely full of paragraphs like that. I think what men don't really react to is something that's handed down to them by some kind of self-appointed authority saying, "Oh, you ought to read this. It's very good for you." And sort of literary quality now of stuff that's emerging, it does have a sort of quality that this is good for you. This is going to show you. This is going to show you how to live and how to improve yourself. What men would really like is to read a novel with a page about how exactly to construct a bomb, I would say, but no one's going to publish that anymore. They're just not.
So if I understand you correctly, Philip, when it comes to novels, being told what to read really repels the male reader. But non-fiction, you can tell them what to read because at least then there's some faith that the instruction promises some form of useful information, because we've seen from the manosphere, the phenomenon online of self-appointed gurus telling men what to read in order to improve their lives is very effective, actually. But they're not telling them to read fiction. And you think there's a very distinct difference between the way that fiction is targeted at men and how men receive it.
Well, the reasons that you're told to read a book, to read fiction, are really bad reasons. At school, you should read Of Mice and Men. It's really heartbreaking what happens to these poor people. It's very sad. You would feel sorry for them, and you just feel people's eyes rolling. But if you say to somebody, you've got to read this book, this explains the causes of the First World War, then you'd say yes. Now, there's a sort of weird assumption that a novel can't explain to you what the causes of the First World War are, but I don't know why. I mean, I don't think that anybody 100 years ago would have thought that it was unreasonable to find out something about some interesting part of the world from a novel. It might not be kind of ultimately authoritative information, but I mean, I feel that I know much better what it was like to live in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, say, from one of my favourite novels, Joseph Roth's The Radetzky March. That's a fantastic novel, and it just kind of explores what the kind of mentality of people serving in this ramshackle, gigantic thing was. And after that, you see, you know what it was like to be there, but you also have a very good sense of why it fell apart.
So there are reasons, strong reasons you can give the male reader why they should read novels. It's just that the reasons they're often given are
rubbish.
Pretty weak.
They're rubbish. Yeah.
And is that because they appeal to how they ought to feel most of the time? Are there reasons beyond connection to historical events and understanding history that can be given to the male reader to make him want to pick up, say, Bleak House?
Because it's exciting. It's fantastically well written. And it takes you into a place that you never knew existed, where where fat men can explode from spontaneous combustion, where mad women patrol the streets, longing to go back to their canaries, where a megalosaurus, he says on the first page, might be patrolling up the mud outside the law courts. It's sheer strangeness. And Dickens says about Bleak House, I think it's a wonderful statement. He just said he has purposely dealt on the romantic side of familiar things. And I think that's such a fantastic thing. And I think that does appeal to men. Men's spirit, I think, is much more romantic than than we actually than we actually feel. We feel that men are practical, but actually they're speculative in their imagination. Dickens says in a really wonderful way about Bleak House that he has purposely dwelt on the romantic side of familiar things, and I think that's a wonderfully it's a wonderfully masculine statement, if I may say so.
Really? How
To
so?
see something that you've seen every day, and to go behind it, to wonder what is there? What does it actually mean? Why is it? If we stopped looking at it in a familiar way, if we started to look at it as though we'd never seen it before, we would find it a very, very strange thing. This goes right back to the beginning of the novel. I mean, in Robinson Crusoe, you put a man on a desert island and you get him to start making all the stuff that he's taken for granted, baking bread. Robinson Crusoe, people forget this. He makes an umbrella and he makes a pair of spats. I mean, that's dwelling on the romantic side of familiar things, working out how things are made, how the world fits together, and the strangeness of it.
So you feel that actually men are, in some ways, uniquely apt to gain a lot from literary fiction,
Yeah.
but that, once again, the failure of imagination on the part of those who would foist it on them means that it never really catches on. It never really inspires them.
No, I think that I think if you presented a prize jury or a syllabus manufacturer with some of the novels that people have loved best in the history of the world, not necessarily literary fiction at all, but something like Neville Shoots on the Beach, that describes in great detail how a nuclear holocaust in the Northern Hemisphere would slowly spread around the world and what it would do to existence. That's a very kind of well-informed sort of thing. If you give them, I don't know, Conrad's Nostromo, which is so specific about the exact details of the geography, or The Secret Agent, which tells you exactly how a bomb goes off and how things can go wrong, they'd run a mile. They'd run a mile. They want to hear people dwelling in their kind of inward thoughts about their emotions and going on about themselves. And those sorts of novels, I mean, they're quite boring to me, actually. People talking about themselves in exactly the same way that if you talk to somebody in ordinary life who starts talking about their own emotions, they're terribly boring.
I mean, I think it's true that men read very much to map the world out in some way in their heads, and that when you're talking about fiction that can do that, they're much more likely to pick up, say, even a dystopian or a science fiction. And we know that, generally speaking, men have gravitated more towards science fiction as a genre than others, for exactly the same reason. Mapping and wargaming is something that men, I think, like to do through any means that literature offers. To go back to the book that you've chosen to speak to me about on this episode, Bleak House, I'm made aware that this entire series to date has been filmed during an historic heat wave in London, and Bleak House very much is set in a mid-19th century London that is enveloped in its own thick ambient weather, very different to this, of course, which is fog everywhere.
Well, Bleak House was the novel that I mean, I'd always read novels. I was always a very keen reader. I think Bleak House was the novel that I completely fell in love with when I was 15. And it was partly a sort of rebellious thing because I went to the sort of school where they didn't foist Dickens on you. So I sort of went and found it in a rebellious way. My grandmother, who lived all her life in a council house, had a set of Dickens which she had acquired. I discovered from an offer from the Daily Express in the 1930s. I've still got it. This is from the set. It's a terrible, terrible. I mean, look at the size of the print. It makes my eyes bleed.
Yeah.
And the paper is really acid.
Yeah, that
I love
causes
it.
headaches.
I love it. And when I was 15, I had no trouble reading a book like this. And it felt very rebellious reading this kind of difficult, complicated. It felt like a project.
Why did it feel rebellious? Who did you think you were rebelling against?
Oh, all the authorities, all the authorities, the people who were telling me. I mean, my A-level set book was The Grapes of Wrath, which I can't stand. I absolutely can't stand. My husband last year said, "Oh, there's a dramatisation of The Grapes of Wrath at the National Theatre," and I was like, "Oh, are you kidding?" Oh, and I went. And after about half an hour, I was thinking, "Oh, I remember this bit. This was terrible. Oh, this is awful. Oh, my God." And all the stuff, all the ways that you were meant to approach literature, I could feel that I loved literature. I loved books. But the people at school doing A-levels, they weren't talking about literature. They were talking about something completely different. They were talking about their emotions or kind of how literature could actually be a kind of moral statement. And I was like, no, I think literature is just extraordinary and strange. And the more I don't understand why this is there, the more it speaks to me. I mean, there are so many moments in Bleak House when you just think, I just don't understand why he did that, why she did that. People don't talk about Dickens as a great psychologist, but he knows that people behave in very, very strange ways, and it's in those strange ways that they really reveal themselves, even if we can't kind of articulate it. So I just fell in love with it.
I get the impression, Philip, that you're not a huge fan of John Steinbeck.
No.
In your new book,
Yeah.
A History of the Novel in Britain, you write about Dickens.
Yeah.
That Dickens is a body of work that shows that human beings are most themselves in their externals and not in what they happen to be thinking. You've talked about him as a great psychologist, as a great diagnostician of his time, and to the extent that you feel that Bleak House belongs in the Lit Path's archive of great recommended books for men who've never really read novels and never really shown much of an interest in fiction. What is the first thing we can say about Bleak House that puts it in that list?
There's a fat man who runs a shop, and one day his neighbours go in and he's disappeared, and there's a sort of fat dripping from the rafters, and everything's black and stinking, and he's died from interior combustion, and his body has gone up in flames from within. If you're not tempted by that, then maybe maybe Dickens isn't for you. I think that the temptation towards people to recommending books to people who have got out of the habit of reading is to say to them, "Oh, here's a kind of small, easy book. It's not very long. It won't scare you." But I don't believe in that. I think people should be given the most strongly flavoured, extreme example, and just see where that takes you.
And you feel this is
that
example.
This is a really extreme book. It's got so many people in it. It's written in such a kind of vivid way. Every page there's a sentence which will make your hair stand on end.
Because to anyone who looks up the synopsis of Bleak House.
Oh, it's
on
not. It's
Wikipedia,
not about the synopsis.
the first thing they'll learn about it is that it all revolves around an interminable lawsuit.
There's other 19th century novels that really do go into lawsuits in a lot of detail.
And it's what a lot of people would expect of 19th century novels, is
Yeah.
that they're all incredibly long and slow and procedural.
And we never really understand what the case is about. What's there very, very powerfully is just the atmosphere of this interminable case that nothing ever happens. And then at the very end, this fantastic paragraph when the lawsuit completely fails. And this has been going on for decades, this case. And one day they all turn up and it's come to an end. I don't think it would ever have just come to an end like that, but Dickens has his way with this. And the paragraph that Dickens describes the end of this interminable lawsuit is so thrilling. Can I read it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to
time
read
we
it.
had a reading.
This is the very end of the case, and Esther, who narrates half of it, has turned up. We asked a gentleman by us if he knew what cause was on. He told us jaundice and jaundice. We asked him if he knew what was doing in it. He said, really, no, he did not. Nobody ever did. But as well as he could make out, it was over. Over for the day? We asked him. No, he said, over for good. Over for good? When we heard this unaccountable answer, we looked at one another, quite lost in amazement. Could it be possible that the will had set things right at last, and that Richard and Ada were going to be rich? It seemed too good to be true. Alas, it was. Our suspense was short, for a break-up soon took place in the crowd, and the people came streaming out, looking flushed and hot, and bringing a quantity of bad air with them. Still, they were all exceedingly amused, and were more like people coming out from a farce or a juggler than from a court of justice. We stood aside, watching for any countenance we knew, and presently great bundles of paper began to be carried out, bundles in bags, bundles too large to be got into any bags, immense masses of papers of all shapes and no shapes, which the bearers staggered under and threw down for the time being anyhow on the hall pavement while they went back to bring out more. Even these clerks were laughing. That's fantastic, isn't it? It's just the tottering out of the great piles of useless paper. It's glorious. It's glorious.
Here is my copy of Oxford's Illustrated Dickens. This is Bleak House. How would you advise somebody to take in his words? It's obviously of its time. The language alone can be difficult. The language alone can be a barrier.
I think it is true that as time passes, we kind of I don't think it's such a problem about kind of the institutions and the way people talk, because actually a lot of the way in which Dickens writes, it couldn't be more vivid even now. I mean, that bit about the quantity of bad air coming from the courts, that's a very direct, plain thing. I think the slight difficulty is often about the way that people relate to each other and the kind of unspoken rules of behaviour, which Dickens knew all about, and his readers would have known all about, and he wouldn't have needed to explain these things. I mean, there's one thing that you always have to explain to readers of 19th century novels, which is that a woman could break off an engagement, but a man couldn't. If a man broke off an engagement, he would be fined a very large sum of money by the courts. And I don't think Dickens ever really mentions that, because they all knew about it. There are other rules, there are other laws that they all understood. A man whose wife died couldn't marry her sister until very late in the century. Now, he doesn't really mention that at all, but that really bears on the plot of a couple of novels, which would be strange. All I can say really is that these are very interesting things to find out. They're not kind of impossible challenges to overcome. You just kind of find out. I mean, of what Chancery is, who the Lord Chancellor is, what the Court of Appeal might be. It's no more difficult really than reading a John Grisham novel about, or even seeing a kind of John Grisham movie adaptation, where you've got to be a bit up to speed with the different practices of American law. I would just say that the difficulties and the unfamiliar aspects of Dickens's world, they're often the things that we find strange, but they're often the things that he finds fascinatingly strange as well. So in a way, he's quite a good way into 19th century literature, because he thinks that so many of the things he writes about are very, very odd, and he's going to talk to you about them.
Another of the things that you say about Dickens in your forthcoming book is that he was a writer that very much wanted to tackle the big issues of his time. I think that, in a sense, could be another way into reading Dickens as maybe even a primary kind of entrance into literary fiction, right? That if a male reader is particularly preoccupied with the way that the world is today, or the direction in which things appear to be going, to pick up a novel written by a writer who was himself intensely interested in his own time can be very useful, particularly if that writer was diagnosing problems that have persisted in some form ever since. And you started this conversation on the subject of economics. When you want to talk about all of the ills of our hyper-optimized capitalist economy, you might think actually Dickens is a good way to grapple with those things by other means.
Maybe. I mean, the problem with this is that Dickens was such a successful writer that a lot of the problems that he wrote about were addressed because he had written about them, and they were cured. I mean, one thing that the classic example is that quite a lot of Little Dorrit, glorious novel, quite a lot of Little Dorrit is in favour of competitive examinations for the civil service. Well, that's not really an issue anymore, and hasn't been for 150 years. But it carries on because the kind of imaginative evocation of this world, still carries on. I myself wouldn't take Dickens's solutions for any of these crises or late capitalism very seriously. I mean, Orwell has a very good essay about Dickens, and he gets rather cross with Dickens because he doesn't come up with the approved answer. I think Dickens's solution in the novels is that somebody rich should come along and start giving money away, and that's not really a sustainable solution.
Certainly not a solution that you necessarily agree with.
So I don't know. I wouldn't. I think that Dickens certainly did address major issues, but there are all sorts of novelists at the time who talked about major issues. There are novels by Fanny Trollope, campaigning against campaigning for the Factory Acts that would stop children working in factories, and they've disappeared because they're not as good novels as Dickens. There's no one dying of spontaneous combustion in Fanny Trollope.
The comedic aspect of Bleak House is one that you've alluded to many times. And I mean, of course, it's tempting to talk about Dickens as this incredibly serious, prescient, and very wise, judicious observer of his time. But let's not neglect the comedy, because I think that is perhaps maybe the most important way in for anybody.
Once you're laughing alongside somebody, then you feel a kind of warmth and fellow feeling to them. I'm not going to try and describe Dickens's jokes because they're too various and they're too good. Can I read something?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. This is Mr. Chadband.
Is it too much of a spoiler to read the spontaneous combustion moment?
Yeah, I think it will. There's another thing from, no. I think I want to read Mr. Chadband, who's a fat religious bloke who's come for tea. My friends, says he, what is this which we now behold as being spread before us? Refreshment. Do we need refreshment then, my friends? We do. And why do we need refreshment, my friends? Because we are but mortal, because we are but sinful, because we are but of the earth, because we are not of the air. Can we fly, my friends? We cannot. Why can we not, my friends? Mr. Snagsby, presuming on the success of the last point, ventures to observe in a cheerful and rather knowing tone, "No wings," but is immediately frowned down by Mrs. Snagsby. "I say, my friends," pursues Mr. Chadband, utterly rejecting and obliterating Mr. Snagsby's suggestion, "why can we not fly? Is it because we are calculated to walk? It is. Could we walk, my friends, without strength? We could not. What should we do without strength, my friends? Our legs would refuse to bear us. Our knees would double up, our ankles would turn over, and we should come to the ground. Then from whence, my friends, in a human point of view, do we derive the strength that is necessary to our limbs? Is it, says Chadband, glancing over the table, from bread in various forms, from butter, which is churned from the milk, which is yielded unto us from the cow, from the eggs which are laid by the fowl, from ham, from tongue, from sausage, and from such like? It is. Glorious. It's absolutely glorious. Chadband plays no part in the plot at all. I mean, he's just a sort of glorious kind of doodle, really. But the novel's just absolutely full of these mad little enterprises.
What is it about Chadband's character that makes him so ridiculous? You sense it there, the sort of performative sophistry. And for what it's worth, you write in A History of the Novel in Britain, performances in grotesquely wrong settings are everywhere in Dickens, and you even reference Chadband's little speech there.
I was thinking of, people sometimes say that Dickens isn't realistic. I was thinking of Dickens when Mr. Infantino was speaking. I mean, Dickens would never have got away with calling this ludicrous person Infantino. He just couldn't. But that speech he gave, saying that this was the greatest cultural event that had ever taken place in the history of mankind, or even better, a couple of years ago, he gave this speech in which he was trying to make the point that football was there for everybody. Exactly a kind of Chadband bit of sophistry, and he said, "I am black, I am gay, I am a lesbian." I was just sitting there laughing. I was thinking, this is Chadband. It really is. He knew, Dickens knew what he was doing. You know.
And do you think we're living in a time that is particularly prone to this attempt at profundity?
Yeah.
When in fact, in the manner of a society of spectacle, we see a lot of people holding forth with these grand ideals.
And people get very, very angered by laughter. But laughter is the appropriate response to people. Stella Creasy taking a photograph of a parakeet in a London park and saying, "Has ever anyone lost a pet?" That was hilarious. She got very cross about people laughing at her, but people should expect to be laughed at, and I expect to be laughed at.
Well,
everyone does.
Yes, and isn't that what the novel uniquely enables us to do?
Yeah.
That again, non-fiction does not quite. Non-fiction encourages us to take ourselves very seriously because it encourages us to take the world very seriously. But novels have that way of encouraging us to step back from the need to anchor ourselves to something that is solid and recognize that much of life is ephemera, much of life is very frivolous, much of life is very silly.
I think it's I would step back from that kind of dichotomy, because I think that good non-fiction can point out when something is ridiculous and funny. I hope that in this book I've managed to make people laugh. One of the things that's very telling about the prize-giving culture now is that prizes almost always go to novels that would not possibly attempt a joke at anybody's expense. But if you look back, even Middlemarch laughs at people, and George Eliot's probably kind of the least humorous of 19th century novelists. As for Dickens kind of uses his humour to sort out whether what the facts of the world are and what the values of the world are. I mean, you see the parade of prime ministers that we've had recently. I mean, laughter is really the appropriate response. It's not a frivolous response. It is kind of pointing at Liz Truss or at Keir Starmer and just bursting out laughing because, of course, that's the human response.
Yeah. Actually, on the subject of British politics, Philip, I think there is an important connection to make between Bleak House and what you're describing. Bleak House does set a story against a backdrop of what is an endless and interminable process, the process of this lawsuit that sits sort of at the heart of the narrative. And I think that British politics and the British people have sensed that they've been witness to and kind of embroiled in an endless process for a good decade or more of constant revision, re-election, reassignments, reshuffling, that sort of oppressive sense of the wear and tear of a system that just constantly churns. You get that in Dickens here, don't you?
I quite like that. I mean, I don't mind politics. I like kind of a new personality approaching when we're suddenly Bridget Phillipson conscious or whoever.
But you're at the coalface of it, like a lot of journalists, and I mean, I'm one too. I understand when you're attracted to these things, it invigorates you. Unlike the famous old lady who's told about a new election and says, "Oh, what, another one?"
Yes, I know it is true that most people just want to be left in peace. Actually, I mean, I think that there's a sort of folk memory of this period of extreme happiness when Lord Salisbury was Prime Minister for like 12 years. Didn't change anything, didn't do anything, just ran the country very efficiently, and no one thought about politics at all. Yeah. And that would be I think that for most people that would be a nice thing to do. But I don't see us getting there anytime soon.
You believe that there is a lot that literary fiction has to offer the male reader. Are there other books besides Bleak House, other books besides anything written by Dickens that were a young man to come along to you and sort of say, you know what, I'm sort of sick and tired of reading about protocols and processes and habits and things that I'm meant to do practically tomorrow when I get up at 6 a.m. and head to the gym. Have you got anything that will just allow me to learn what it's like to be somebody else, or how I can understand the opposite sex better?
Yeah, that is the key thing, that people don't and shouldn't pick up a book wanting to think about themselves some more. They're there to introduce you to other people, to turn your gaze outward. I think that the writer that I would always recommend to somebody now is Mick Herron, and I think that his spy novels are so interesting about a range of human beings. They go very happily into the voices and the worlds of these different people, and they give you a real sense of what it's like to be in this extraordinary imagined world of failure and falling apart. I think they're very Dickensian, actually, those books. But certainly a book about a largish group of people finding their way through a world that isn't quite the same as the world that the reader lives in. That would be a very good thing.
We should end by talking about your latest book, which is coming out next month. There's a whole history there, and again, it's a nice crossover of a genre that men generally gravitate towards, i.e. the chronicling of time, of events, on a subject that perhaps doesn't interest the male reader that often. Do you hope that anybody who's a voracious reader of history will potentially actually read these books that you're writing about and not treat it purely as a historical account?
Well, what I was hoping to do with this book, I've read a lot of histories of an art form, and they always fall down because they're basically somebody talking about how they feel about these books. But actually, I wanted to write about how they were produced, how the changes in copyright law over the years made something possible that hadn't been possible before, how distributors and publishers forced novelists to include something or leave something out. I mean, nobody ever talks about the way that the power of subscription libraries in the second half of the 19th century meant that nobody in a 19th century novel could have it off with somebody they weren't married to. There's no adultery in any British novel in the second half of the 19th century. It happens in American novels and it happens in French novels because the subscription libraries weren't there. So I wanted to talk about practical things, because novelists who have a career, they are very practical-minded people. They're not just people sitting on a mountain top uttering inspired statements like poets. They get out there, they negotiate stuff, they make sense of what they can do, and that, I think, was really what I wanted to do with the book. What comes out at the end is, of course, a human statement. It's all about how novelists have found ways to overcome what Hardy at one point said, that novelists were the slaves of stolid circumstances, and they have to overcome those circumstances to say what they want to say. And it's a miracle that they did succeed so much when circumstances were sometimes really against them.
Philip Hensher, thank you very much for joining me. This has been
Thank you for asking me.
An absolute delight. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you on the next episode.